you are talking about incredibly special people, who are all in some sense genetic freaks and incredibly talented athletes and very robustly well-rounded athletes, so they're all freaks, every single one of them. And then the ones that win the most are kind of like the most freakish of the freaks. But they
You say that with all the respect and admiration that they deserve. Yes.
exactly, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. I have huge admiration for them.
Welcome to the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast. I'm Matthew Piaro, and with me is Matt Henson. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure as always.
Well, it's been a while, eh?
I know, it's been a minute.
It's been a hot minute.
I mean, not actually a minute, several minutes.
But we're back. We're back with a new season of the pod. On this episode, we have a friend of the pod, Kevin Field. He has been on before, and we like to call him internally and a bit externally Mr. Moneyball of Canadian cycling. And by that, we mean he looks at numbers, he looks at data, and he, in the past, has been able to accomplish some pretty big things for Canadian riders. The topic of today's chat with Kevin is myth busting. He and I are going to look at some ideas that have taken hold at the top levels of road cycling, and we're going to maybe turn those ideas on their head by looking at the data.
And some people like fishing, some people like video games, some people like jogging, and Kevin Field likes spreadsheets and data. A little too much, actually.
Well, it's because of that love of numbers that we are going to have some pretty interesting insights for the listeners about the sport that we love so much. But before my conversation with Kevin Field, let's take a look at some recent racing that's been going on. We're into March, so the season has been in full swing on the road side, and I want to just take a look at some of the more notable accomplishments by some of the Canucks out there. 2 podium places by Canadian gents include one by Riley Pickerel. He was third at the Tour de Provence. That was a pretty exciting sprint finish that he was involved in. And there is also another third place for Canuck Axel Froner. He is on CT Giant Store Anson NWVG. That rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
It's a catchy name.
It is a club based in the Netherlands, and Axel Froner is, of course, a Canuck, originally from Toronto, the Toronto area.
And a son of a guy we both know.
It's true.
Because everyone's kids are racing, except yours.
Give him time. We'll see. That's on the men's side. On the women's side, there are some really fantastic results. Olivia Barry, who has been on the podcast, has 2 wins already this season. One in a 1.1 race, the Women's Cycling Pro Costa de Almeria. And Barry took the first stage of the Vuelta Extremadura Feminas. Her Movistar teammate, Marielle Meyering, went on to win that stage race in Spain.
And she still finished up there, too, and I think she was 7th in the GC.
Exactly. That's exciting stuff. But one of the earliest big results for a Canuck is Magdalene Valliers-Mill, also someone who's been on the podcast. She had a great race. It was the Trofeo Palma Femina. She got away with a bunch of riders from UAE Team ADQ, and there was actually 3 of them in the mix and a few other riders with Valliers-Mill, and she played her cards just right, and she took that win. And it's a pretty great win for a rider who's usually in a domestique role. Actually, I spoke with her shortly after that win for a short story in the magazine, which is coming out very soon. Probably almost at the same time as this pod is coming out.
And if you have a chance, you should check out on her website the clip of her going down towards finish. She attacks and then takes off in the descent, and just a beautiful descent. And it's a great win, like for any pro, getting their first big win is a stepping stone to more stuff. Hopefully.
I think it will be, and that sort of gets into the story I have in the magazine, where she was tapped to for that ride by the DS and the team. They had full confidence in her for that event, and she wasn't sure she was hearing them right. She was like, "Wait, so okay, I get it. I'll save myself till the climb, but then like, who am I working for at that point?" And the team was like, "We're working for you." It finally clicks for Vallières-Mille. And yeah, that she was quite honored to be the protected rider for that event. And we think maybe that'll happen again. I hope. Yeah. This pod is coming out just before the first monument of the season, which is pretty exciting. Milan-San Remo. It's a doozy. It's the longest one on the calendar.
But, I got to say, this generation, these guys, they're kind of wimps this year. I mean, they got to toughen up. They're only doing 288K plus a couple K of neutralized. So, I mean, it's just a little training ride this year, isn't it? It's not as long as usual.
That's right. The route has been totally nerfed by the fact that it is 6 kilometers shorter than it was last year.
Easy peasy now.
You mentioned it's 288 this year. Last year was 294. I was looking at distances throughout the past few years. It got up to, in 2020, 305. But usually it hovers between the 291, 294 mark. But like you're saying, coffee ride this year.
Yeah. Wimps. Wimps, I tell you.
But no, it will really tenderize the legs, as it always does. It's just so darn long. And that makes those little climbs, if we're comparing it to a stage in the Dolomites, say, a Giro d'Italia stage in the Dolomites. But those climbs, as we know, can be decisive, and they can be quite difficult to get over once you've already raced for roughly 270 kilometers, say.
And they're fast too. I mean, obviously they're going full gas, as everyone likes to say. But, someone on the switchback, especially on the Poggio, you can see that, they almost have to slow down around the corners because they're going so fast. And they're all in the big chain rings. So it's always exciting, right? I mean, the last couple of years especially have been super, super fun to watch. Van der Poel last year, and then Mohoric before that. And I'm sure we're going to get another spectacle with some of the big names there.
It's interesting that a lot of to me it seems a lot of former winners are lining up. Even the old geezer, Alexander Kristoff, who won in 2014, he will be there. Same with Arnaud Démare, Mikhail Kwiatkowski, Julien Alaphilippe. Wout van Aert will not be there. But you mentioned Matej Mohoric and Mathieu van der Poel, last year's winner. And Jasper Stuyven, I believe, will also be there.
And that Slovenian fellow, what's his name?
The Slovenian
Pogacar or something or other. He seems pretty good. He seems like he's doing all right.
Yeah. How early can he break away compared to, let's say...
He should just break away in the neutralized. Just go. Just go for it. Just go past the lead car. F it. I'm going for it.
Give us something incredibly
loony. Only 288K. Nothing.
Something incredibly loony, as you did at Strade Bianche.
That would be cool, though, to see someone go. I mean, it would never happen because they'll just get caught. But it'd be neat to see someone go against the narrative that we always see, attacking the Poggio and Cipressa or whatever. It'd be neat to see. I mean, if anyone would do it, it would be him, too. He'd do something stupid. I mean, stupid, but amazing.
There will be 2 Canucks. It looked like there was going to be 3 Canucks there for a minute. The official start list had Derek G racing. He raced last year for the first time, Milan-San Remo. Remember, he got injured on opening weekend, which was a super bummer, and his name has since come off the list. He will not be lining up.
I was surprised to see him back so soon, but I mean, hopefully they're just being cautious. There's still plenty of season left for him, so hopefully he gets back into the races soon.
Hugo Uhl will be there. He has lined up for Milan-San Remo 5 times before. Guillaume Boivin will be there. It'll be his third time. The last time he was there was 2020. Israel Premier Tech, to me, it looks like they will be racing for Corbin Strong, who, like G, was at Milan San Remo for the first time in 2023. One name that struck me on that team's lineup is Jakob Fuglsang, who, as I searched back, I'm like, he must have done this race at least once. He has never done Milan San Remo. At 38, he is lining up for the first time.
Well, thankfully, it's so short this year for the old guy, right? Won't be too hard.
It'll be just a cakewalk for him. And I know I said Derek G is not racing it this year, but I want to read something he mentioned to me about last year's event. And, this is more for Jakob Fuglsang. Maybe this is the advice he would give his teammate Fuglsang for his first time. G found that it wasn't so bad, oddly enough, doing the long Milan San Remo. But once things got to the Cipressa, G says you either have it or you don't. And if you don't, the race is kind of over for you there. And that was the case for him. But he wasn't feeling too bad. But, then they hit the Cipressa. There's about, like I said, 270 kilometers in the legs at that point. And a rider usually really feels it right there. However, an interesting thing that G said was that last year, the following day after the Milan San Remo race, he wasn't feeling as totally shelled as he thought he might. He's actually felt worse after shorter races where, as he puts it, you're just on the pedals the whole time. So it's a big endurance ride.
Yeah, I've heard that before too. Because essentially, unless even if you're doing bottle duty or riding around the caravan, doing stuff for your team, you're still. It is kind of it's a very fast, but it's still a big fast group ride, right? So especially if there's a tailwind, you're sitting in. Again, 50K an hour sitting in, but you've got those two big climbs at the end, and I hate to say easy because it's certainly not easy, but it's probably the easier race for most of these guys to do, with the exception of those last two climbs. And of course, if you sit up on those climbs, you're not in contention, then your efforts are going to be pretty quick. So I'm not surprised that you'd be much more sore after a race that's full gas from the start and lots of little punchy climbs.
Exactly, and lots of big hard efforts throughout the race.
You and I'd be dropped in the neutralized section, but still.
Oh, there's not even a point of mentioning us, dude. You've done the story, and I recommend readers look it up. Just what does it take to ride within the pro peloton? And there's...
Which actually Kevin Field gave us lots of insight about from his numerous Excel files.
Oh, that's right. He did help us with that one. Anyway, there's no point in even mentioning the common rider in relation to these people's efforts. It's like, whatever, you might as well compare one of us to a NFL football player while you're at it.
No, I would just run away from that. I'd rather be in a pro bike race than NFL, because I think you and I would be flattened. Getting dropped is probably a lot less painful than getting flattened by some 300-pound linebacker.
One thing I'm totally curious about as to this year's Milan San Remo is something we saw at the finish last year. It was the very small couch. If you remember that great, not so great picture. Not so great for Wout van Aert. Mathieu van der Poel and Filippo Ganna seemed, okay being that cozy, but Wout van Aert did not want to be on that tiny couch waiting for the podium. That couch actually belongs not to RCS, but to a company that is hired to do a lot of the infrastructure at the finish. So we'll see if that company, sprung for a bigger couch this year.
There's no love in that love seat.
This episode of the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast is supported by the Number 22 Bicycle Company. Number 22 makes fine titanium road, gravel, and track bikes. We've reviewed them in the magazine. Here to tell me more about Number 22 are its founders, Mike Smith and Bryce Gracie. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey, good, Matt.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having us.
Not all bikes are made equal. We see that with carbon fiber for sure, but Titanium. Tell me a bit about how number 22 approaches titanium bike construction, Mike.
Yeah, titanium is a pretty famously difficult material to work with. And one of the things that really sets number 22 apart is the level of experience of our team. We build all of our bikes completely in-house in our upstate New York factory, and our craftsmen have decades of experience fabricating only custom titanium frames.
Yeah, that's right. That really translates to a deep understanding of the nuances of building with titanium. And we think the end results are built to a higher standard in most every way. Our frame's alignment, the finish quality, and our general level of construction quality, they're pretty much amongst the best in the world. And we've been honored to receive numerous awards over the years that are directly related to the quality of our bikes.
For sure. We've definitely noticed some of those awards pop up as you guys have taken your bikes to various shows across the continent and I think even the world. For unrivaled craftsmanship, check out number 22 at 22bicycles.com. That's 22bicycles.com. You can learn more about the build process there and even start an order for a number 22 bike of your very own. All right, so from Italy, we return back to Canada to Kevin Field. As I mentioned, he is the Billy Bean of Canadian cycling, Moneyball of Canadian cycling. He has worked on such teams as Symmetrics back in the O's, SpiderTech in the teens, and he was instrumental in Canadian successes at numerous World Championships events in recent history. You and Kevin go way back, don't you there, Matt?
Yeah, I knew him before. He actually ran a team called Control Data when Gord Fraser needed a team before he turned pro. Then when we were on Jet Fuel together, the first year when it was what was called then a Division 3 team, now it's called Continental Team, the first UCI team in Canada, he rode for a couple of years. That was towards the end of his cycling career. And then he kind of transitioned into more of a DS position. But we spent many hours on the road and many hours cycling and many hours talking about data. Well, I would be more listening, trying to shut up as he spoke. He's a font for sure.
Today, he is involved with Bridge the Gap. That's an organization that supports Canadian riders as they try to make it as pros. It gives them support and information, and it's an organization he's been involved with. For a few years now, he is chair of the board of directors. He is also on the board of directors of Team EcoFlow Kronos, which is an under-23 team. I think it's going into its third year this year. It's loaded with Canucks as they make that crucial step between junior and pro, and they get a much-needed racing experience in Europe. For this discussion with Kevin Field, I came at him with some myths, some road cycling myths. Makes it sound like they're old-timey. They're
almost like tropes.
There you go. Ideas that have taken hold, and a lot of us take it for granted or we'll just toss them around as given. One of those myths is road cycling in North America is dead. If not dead, then very, very unwell. Another myth that I present to Kevin is the idea, let's say, is at the top levels of road cycling, Canada is doing awesome. And, we can look to Tour de France stage wins last year and the year before, Paris-Roubaix win last year by Alison Jackson. And we see people going up to the top levels like Isabella and Eva Holmgren. So yeah, everything's great. We're just on going strong, road cycling, Canucks. There you go. And the final idea that seems to be circulating and seems to be current wisdom, possibly, is the idea that you got to go from junior to pro. Kind of like how I cited the Holmgrens. You got to just, if you don't go from junior to pro, that's it, man. You're not making it big. We're looking for superstars at a young age.
So basically, Kevin's just a big killjoy. He's just going to ruin all these wonderful ideas of ours?
Oh, it's not that simple. It's not that simple. Besides, you want him to ruin your incense that he'll ruin the idea that road cycling in North America is dead?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it is true though that, like we just repeat things sometimes and without looking at any data, it's all anecdotal. And then get a guy like Kevin Field here with this book of knowledge, this holy Bible of data, and he can point out that we're totally wrong. And we need to just shut up and stop saying the same stuff all over again.
So we're going to see where the data leads us and whether the data kills the vibes or modifies the vibes. Here is my conversation with Kevin Field. Kevin Field, welcome back to the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast.
Thanks, Matt. It's awesome to be back.
Right on. We've had some good conversations recently, mostly about road cycling and where Canada stands within that discipline at its top levels. You've shared some ideas with me that I found pretty striking. Now, I shouldn't be surprised, and neither should longtime listeners. You're a man who analyzes data, not just training data like a coach might, but all kinds of race data. I've seen some of your spreadsheets, and they can be intimidating as they are enlightening. But the data can lead you away from popular cycling wisdom or ideas. Sometimes it can seem like you are zigging while others are zagging. But your zigs are based on some solid data.
That's a super fun way to describe it.
Right on. A bit of wisdom I want to look at, and this is wisdom in air quotes. It's more of an idea, I guess. The idea is that road cycling in North America is dead. Or if it's not dead, it's very, very unwell. In the past 10 years, we've seen the Tour of Alberta, USA Pro Cycling Challenge, Tour of Utah, and the Tour of California all disappear. At low levels as well, it seems the road scene is not great. What, though, does some of your data say about that?
Well, yeah, that's really interesting because so at Bridge the Gap, we started in the last few years, like through Caroline Canuel and Sean Clark, Canadian Cup, where we just wanted to, coming out of the pandemic, we thought it was actually super critical to elevate some importance and take a look at sort of the health of domestic events and where our riders are first starting to race and then developing as bike racers and athletes, and just putting a little bit of emphasis and celebrating that a little bit. And so we've done it for 2 years now. And over the course of those 2 years, so because we now have 2 years to look at, we're actually seeing some actually really encouraging things, So overall, sort of the number of riders ranked or the participation in the Canadian Cup is up 30%. And it's actually increased in every single category we track. So we track junior girls and boys, and then we track elite and U23 as a combined group for women and men. And each of those groups is up significantly, so junior women are up about 21%, junior boys are up 40%, elite women are up 30%, which is really encouraging. And U23 and elite men is up 23%. So everything in aggregate is up almost 30%, which kind of indicates that, at least below those top, more sort of like higher profile international events that absolutely have gone away, there's still tons of athletes that have a true, genuine passion and interest in the sport, and they're getting out and racing their bikes, which is awesome and amazing to see. And I think that creates, a really good, rich environment for those international events, those UCI international events, to come back and have healthy domestic athletes across Canada and the United States competing in them and competing really well.
That's interesting. So maybe when we hear people grumbling about the health of the road scene, they're not, it's easy to look at those big races that I just listed off and their demise.
Yeah, and I think those, don't get me wrong, I think those big races are really important. And the fact that some of them many of them have gone away is is definitely something that we have to take a look at. And, and smart, good, passionate people need to work on it. And I think they are, but I think just below that is where the real health of any sport exists, sort of it's in that sort of those people getting engaged in the sport for the first time, getting interested in competition inside that sport, competing really like expansively or extensively in that sport, in those provincial level races, national level races, just below those top international events that'll come in. That's where the lifeblood of your sport is. And if you look at Canadian cycling right now in that zone, you'd have to say it's in a pretty good state.
Now, I want to give listeners a bit more of a picture of the Canadian Cup and just give them an idea of what races we're talking about. Now, but before that even, I would like to remind people the Canadian Cup is an initiative by Bridge the Gap. That's an organization you're involved with that helps to develop cyclists, give them support and direction as they build their careers. And the Canadian Cup, it's not like you designed a race series from scratch. What are some of the events that are part of the Canadian Cup?
That's really important, so like, yeah, we are not event organizers. We are not producing events ourselves. We just took a look at what are the events that exist, and for sure the ones that have been historically really important in Canadian cycling. And we just decided we're going to track results and participation across those, and call it the Canadian Cup. And we used actually, and this, when I say we, I should say Sean and Carol-Anne.
And that's Sean Clark and Carol-Anne Canuel. Carol-Anne is a former pro, and Sean, it will tell us a bit about Sean Clark. He may not be super familiar to listeners.
Yeah, so Sean is actually he's a Canadian coach who had actually a string of really some pretty cool opportunities, and now he's a sports director on Jayco Alula. So he's a sports director inside a major world tour team, and he's working as a sports director primarily with their women's team. But like a lot of those, world tour teams are fully integrated. So their sports directors will work across their teams and athlete groups. So Sean does probably like 90% of his work with the women's world tour team, but he'll actually do a little bit of moonlighting across into the men's program, and for sure within their sport group, it's one team, so when they sit down and have meetings and are planning out their stuff, he's working across everything, it's fantastic. Like we have Sean up there now working in the world tour, and you have Chris Rodzilski and Paulo Saldana and Steve Bauer. Course, more and more Canadians working in those sort of coaching and sports director roles, or even performance director roles inside the biggest teams in the world, which is fantastic. It's an invaluable resource for us.
So the Canadian Cup was cooked up by you, Sean, and Carol-Anne, and give us a picture of some of the events that go into the Canadian Cup.
Some of the events that we focus on in the Canadian Cup we try to pick some early events that hit the season early. So we've put in things like the Thule Grand Prix, which sort of opens up the Quebec calendar, Northumberland Road Race, and other road races that would be featured inside the Ontario Cup provincial series. We include all of the provincial championships in every province, the Agency Cycling Festival in Victoria, Grand Prix of Charlevoix, of course, the national championships, and the major Canadian races like the Tour of Gatineau, Abitibi, Beauce. These races are sort of Gastown, of course, which is sort of our global relay, our main sort of benefactor for the fund. Like having that race back has been fantastic. So these are the races. Then we wrap everything up usually with the Criterium National, which is sort of closing off the season at the end of the year. And we include some of the series, like Marty Lachine will include. So those are, in essence the events, so not like all those events, sort of if we're looking at some of the major provincial events in Canada. Actually, well, I think the Bow Cycle Classic was included last year. As races are coming back online in the provinces, we're definitely putting those back into the Canadian Cup. In total, it's about 47 events across the season, and we've tried to make sure that it's pretty well distributed across looking at juniors and then our U23 and our elite categories. So we have about, sort of 16 days of races or race days that we look at inside of all of those groups. So it's a pretty robust look at the Canadian calendar and the Canadian season.
Now, do you know of any riders who say, Canadian Cup, I'm going to do as many of these as I can? Or is that not how it's supposed to function? Is it function differently than someone, trying to tick off all the events on their calendar?
So there's kind of two answers there. At Bridge the Gap, we definitely, like, sometimes especially last year, we actually had it was a challenge for us to keep on top of it, because we're mostly, volunteers. We're mostly doing it in our spare time and sort of just collecting and collating the results. Sometimes we would have delays or lags. So when we're good at sort of keeping the results current and timely and promoting it, it actually does get some real buzz going. And we get lots of little messages, whether it's, Instagram or however, about excitement around the series. And then really, I think it's more on us when we kind of get distracted with some other things, or we can't stay on top of it as much as we'd like to. Obviously, like the interest in the series itself can wane, but it's definitely something we're taking a look at. And this year, it's actually super awesome. Like Alex Catterford, he was retired from pro cycling just 2 years ago now, and he's got a background in engineering, and so he's quite technical, and he's got an interest in developing some of his programming skills. And so in order to do the Canadian Cup, it's not super sophisticated programming. So Alex has been working away over the course of the winter to prepare a little bit more for the Canadian Cup this year, which will be the third year that we've done it, and make sure that we can be a little bit collecting and processing the results that will be a little bit quicker and easier on our side. Like, I'd call it semi-automated, not fully automated yet, because there's still some challenges in there in terms of, especially, I think it's awesome, but in more and more across the country, you see inconsistency in the different categories, so some provinces are really embracing ability-based racing, where they're going to mix sort of age categories together and let them race. So we're figuring out how to deal with that little nuance of how races happen these days is a little bit of a challenge, not an insurmountable one, but yeah, this year will be a bit better in terms of keeping it updated and regular. And when we do that, there's definitely lots of interest.
Is there going to be a pro cycling stats of the Canadian Cup?
Well, that would definitely be the long-term, like the longer term vision or objective, so once we get, once you've got data in a spreadsheet, you're essentially it's structured. It's a quasi database, so it's easy to take it and put it into like a more sort of proper or richer kind of database, and then you can definitely. It's not a big stretch from there to build a web front end. But I think for us the bigger challenge is the collection and sort of automating the collection of the results data, and then dealing with that. How do we have a consistent process to deal with the ability-based racing? So for us, it's the data capture, the data pull. Is going to be the bigger challenge. But once we get there, yeah, we would love to essentially have like a Canadian pro cycling stats. Would be a really rich sort of website that you could sort of filter and sift through and see sort of the breadth and depth of Canadian bike racing. It'd be awesome.
Oh, that would be great. As someone who reports and researches races and racers, that would be amazing. But I think also it helps people who follow sport are, they tend to be a bit stat junkies, whether they're looking at standings and all sorts of stuff like that. So I think that could serve a purpose in generating interest even beyond racers, seeing how they stack up.
Yeah, and then for us at Bridge the Gap, it does have an ability to pull us together as a community, which is a really important thing for us at Bridge the Gap. Another important thing for us is to actually like sort of track that progress and that journey of the different athletes almost at like an individual level, and that was the interesting thing we had this year too, where we were able to we kind of created what we thought were sort of four fun groups of riders, so the improvers would be the athletes within a category like junior or U23 or elite or whatever, that who made the most improvement from last year to this year. And then we looked at the dependables would be the riders like demonstrating that consistency, so they were up there in the sort of top 10 of the rankings in the first year and also in the second year. And then we looked at a group we called the graduates. And this is an important one in terms of, sort of seeing and understanding athletes that maybe have some real potential. And so graduates would be athletes moving from like junior to U23 and doing it quite successfully. So moving from being a top 10 in the Junior Canadian Cup to a top 10 in the U23 Elite Combined Canadian Cup in their first year moving across. And then the newcomers would be the riders that sort of hit the radar for the first time, and especially if they were young, so first year juniors performing extremely well. So looking at those four groups was also important for us because it helps us it's a cool indicator of seeing some real sort of hidden potential or talent that some people may not otherwise be taking a look at.
What do you think is the role of gravel in all this? And I say that because another related bit of, or another related idea is that, gravel is really the latest thing that people are gravitating towards, and maybe gravel is eating road racing's lunch a bit. So, where do you think gravel fits into this?
That's first of all, I'm a huge fan of everything that's happening in gravel. I think whenever anything happens in cycling that's new and exciting and draws in lots of people, it's just awesome for the sport. I do also see that gravel draws in a lot of gravel is drawing in a lot of our best athletes, our rising athletes, our like current top athletes, et cetera, et cetera. So the ability for them to do like bang out a gravel race and have super fun in these events, I think is only complementary and only good. And I think we will also start to see people who got into gravel initially. So gravel is their introduction to cycling, but they're going to get interested in other types of bike racing, and we're going to see some cool crossover and mixing. And that's another thing that people who know me know that I'm a huge advocate for sort of multidiscipline and discipline mixing in a kind of really intentional and well thought through way. And ultimately the best athletes, they're able to leverage sort of multidiscipline racing super effectively, and there's so much sort of complementary goodness that you can have if you're racing a couple of different disciplines and doing so really well, because the skills that you develop and the techniques and tactics that you develop in the different disciplines complement each other so much, so I think that about gravel. I think gravel can be this amazing new discipline in cycling that can be super beneficial to mountain bikers, super beneficial to cross riders, super beneficial to road riders, and super beneficial obviously to the gravel riders themselves who choose to use a little bit of racing in those other disciplines to complement their gravel. So I think it's fantastic.
Another idea I want to explore with you is this. Canada is in a great spot right now with road cycling. The past 2 years at the Tour de France, Canadians have won a stage in each year. Last year, Alison Jackson won Paris-Roubaix. Recently, Magdalene Vallières-Mille won a 1.1 race in Spain. And sure, we're not Belgium, but we're getting better. What do you think of this idea?
Well, first, I think everything you just said is amazing, right? And those things are all true. Like we're seeing these successes that from individual athletes that, and of course, Derek at the Giro, which was like so much fun to watch. You know, that's all true, and that's all amazing. The other thing that's also true, and we need to keep an eye on, is how many Canadians are progressing to those zones of the sport. You know, how many Canadians are getting into effectively pro cycling, which is, that goes back to Bridge the Gap too, you know. So Bridge the Gap, like our purpose of the organization is to help Canada's most aspiring and promising young cyclists reach the forefront of professional cycling. So we're actually trying to get Canadians there. And so when we track that and see how many Canadians and at what rate are they progressing to the sort of top zones of the sport, right now, that's actually something that we should be, I would say we should have a bit more focus on and have a little bit more concern around it, because while women's cycling is progressing at alarming rates, the number of Canadian athletes that we're getting into the sort of top pro zone of women's cycling is stagnant. And while we're having all of these sort of historic successes with our men, the number of Canadian men that are in the pro zones of the sport has actually been in steady decline for the past 4 years. So if we can't keep that flow, like an appropriate flow of talented athletes developing and progressing to those areas of the sport, these successes that we're seeing that are amazing, and we should be super excited and celebrate them, they may not be there in 3 to 5 years.
I find that striking because as a storyteller of Canadian cycling, and I tell the stories of these athletes who have these successes, and I track them all. So it seems I have lots to talk about. I'm not twiddling my thumbs going, there's no one racing. There were a few years there at the Tour de France where there were no Canadians. That's not so long ago. So when you say on the men's side that it's declining, that I don't know, I do find that interesting, because we also see like Israel Premier Tech's development team. There's always a few Canucks there. So yeah, but your numbers are showing something different.
Yes, absolutely. The numbers are like, we're losing, like I said, with men, we're losing one per year, pretty consistently of the overall number of guys that are racing there. So, you always have to think about that, in terms of, your flow of athlete development and athlete progressions, that if you're going to retain like a strong position in something, you need to find what is your happy balance. Like, how many Canadian athletes should we ideally have racing in pro cycling? I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a bit more than what we have right now. Like if it was, sort of a little bit like say double or maybe a little bit more, that would be a healthy balance of sort of Canadian athletes in that sort of pro zone. And then we would need to make sure that kind of systematically how we work in Canadian cycling with our athletes, we can continue to develop new ones at a rate that's equal or slightly greater than the ones that are reaching their time in the sport. Like it's natural that athletes eventually retire. So if we're not developing the next ones at a rate that is equal to or slightly greater than the rate that our top athletes are retiring, we get ourselves into a bit of a pickle.
Another trend I want to throw out there is cycling, especially road cycling, is all about young superstars. We saw it a few years ago when Egan Bernal won the Tour de France, and then it was Tadej Pogacar. Even Wout van Aert, when he won his first 2 Tour de France stages, was only 24. And even in Canada, we have young athletes who seem to have gone right to the top. There is Michael Leonard, who joined Ineos in 2022 at the age of 19, or was announced to be joining for the 2023 season. And then just this year, Ava and Bella Holmgren have gone to Lidl Trek. So that's it, right? We're looking for superstar juniors now to graduate to the top levels of sport. If you don't go pro at 18, sorry, that's it.
I think that's, first of all, this is another place where the data would tell a different story.
Okay.
On the men's side, for sure, there have been some examples, of, Michael Leonard, AJ August, Remco Evenepoel, et cetera, like some really uber talented athletes that go direct from junior into pro cycling and are successful right away. That is not the norm. The norm still, if you look across the, sort of the landscape of that pro space in cycling, where you have, in total across men and women, you have 50 pro cycling teams. And if you just look at men, so you've got 18 World Tour teams and 17 pro teams or pro continental teams, 35 teams. So if you just look at the World Tour last year or in recent years, you have roughly about 40 neopros that graduate into or get recruited into the World Tour on an annual basis. The vast majority are still U23s. So this junior phenom stuff that we see is exactly that. It's junior phenoms. And these phenoms are going to be, a fraction of 1% of the, most uber talented athletes on the planet, So like this year, only 3 juniors went direct from junior to the World Tour. So that's 6%, so the vast majority are still spending some time in U23, developing physically, developing technically, tactically, et cetera, and then making the progression to the World Tour when they're a little bit more ready. Now, the one thing that we see that is kind of consistent, whether it's these, freakish juniors or these freakish U23s, because I think like when you're talking about the World Tour, or pro cycling, you are talking about incredibly special people, they're all in some sense, sort of genetic freaks and incredibly talented athletes and very robustly well-rounded athletes, so they're all freaks, every single one of them. And then the ones that win the most are kind of like the most freakish of the freaks. But they
you say that with all the respect and admiration that they deserve.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I have huge admiration for them.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we're seeing, whether it's the juniors or the U23s, is I used to look at pro cycling and say, okay, it actually takes, once you get there, you get recruited into a team. The time it takes you to adapt and adjust is significant. Like it's a few years. Now we're seeing much more seamless transitions. Like riders are moving into pro teams and they're more ready to absorb the work and be productive bike racers inside their teams right away. And this is absolutely something. So, like I also work inside the EcoFlow Chronos U23 project, which is sort of part of Premier Tech's sort of significant and awesome investment in support of cycling and Canadian cycling in particular. On that team, we basically tried to organize our recruiting process so we can manage all the people expressing an interest, and we have a way of profiling them. And part of that profiling process is we take a look and we collect some of their training data, including their power data. So we're looking at sort of 3 things. We're looking at their training and their training background. We're looking at their current power profile, and we're looking at their current race performances, and also the amount of racing, right? So what is their racing experience? So what races are they doing and how are they doing in those races? And then we're looking at those other 2 areas. And what we are starting to see when we're looking at especially riders coming from what you might characterize as a more mature or one of a more sort of major cycling country. So, Western Europe, Great Britain, the United States, Australia. When we look at young riders that are applying to EcoFlow as juniors, we are seeing a significant change in training, which is now creating a significant change in the physical profile as it relates to power, So we're seeing these things, so we are seeing that the international riders in sort of the world's sort of like top cycling nations at a younger age, they're training differently.
How so?
So they're training more, significantly more, actually. So it used to be you'd take a look at sort of a top international junior, and you'd think that they were training somewhere in, maybe 650 to 750 hours a year. We are seeing lots of juniors that are now pushing that up to 800 and 900 hours, so this is actually a really significant increase in the volume of training. And I need to be careful as I say these things because, people hear this stuff and then they go out tomorrow and try to do the change. And
right.
You can't do these kinds of changes overnight or in one big fell swoop. But we're seeing a significant increase in volume, and we're seeing inside that volume, we're seeing a significant increase in the percentage of higher intensity training in the volume. So riders are training harder and training more.
And at a younger age, I gather?
At a younger age. Yeah. Now, some of this is, like we as Canada, more of a winter nation, like historically, we talk about, like we can't ride year round and blah, blah, blah. And that's true, like we can't ride our bikes year round because of our long winters, but it doesn't mean that we can't train year round, and train differently. So the other thing that's happening with training, and this would be like a little bit of an oversimplification of it, but for the purposes of the discussion, it's a good oversimplification. People are kind of taking what used to be that sort of traditional idea of like periodization, and they're compressing it and repeating it multiple times a year. So they're basically in and out of training phases or periods right now where they're kind of doing all the stuff that you would normally have planned out with more prolonged periods in each phase over the course of a year. And they're just repeating that over and over and over again.
So this is the sort of arc of endurance work, a lot of endurance work, and then some intensity leading up to the race?
Exactly. That's exactly it. And, a lot of it is, when you look at it in pro cycling, in the pro teams, it's like a lot of teams now, they have a much stronger reliance on training camps, right? So they're moving their athletes in and out of training camps all the time, so you have these heavily supported, sort of intense short training blocks or a training camp where the riders are going in and doing some really good high quality work in a well-monitored, well-structured environment that's also supporting recovery exceptionally well, right? And then the athletes go home and they take a little bit of a break, and then they do it again or go to a race. So they're in and out of these more intense phases of training. The other thing that you're seeing in cycling right now too is kind of this evolution of these like superstructure teams, right? So vertically integrated pro cycling teams that have their pro team, their development team, and even more and more, they have either like in-house junior, or they have outreach programs into junior teams that they're going to work with to sort of identify this younger and younger talent, right? So this idea of these freakish juniors that go right to the world tour, well, that's not necessarily the reality of what's happening. The outreach into junior and recruiting and scouting younger athletes by the pro teams is absolutely happening. And the majority of those recruits are going into the U23 Devote teams inside the vertically integrated super teams. But the way that sort of training science and training is being understood and evolved inside the pro teams is actually trickling out into the junior spaces now. Right. So the juniors are benefiting from the knowledge that's being developed inside these, sort of bigger and better functioning pro teams, and they're starting to be able to introduce pro style training methods earlier in their careers and doing it like, we can't say with confidence, but you can say with a lack of confidence that some of them are likely doing it really well and some of them are likely doing it poorly. But what is happening is you're seeing this significant increase in volume and intensity of training inside the volume happening at younger and younger ages. And I think with the evolution of other aspects of our understanding of training and physiology, et cetera, especially as it relates to sort of diet and nutrition and recovery and cross training, especially like strength and conditioning, and sort of like creating just a more physically robust, more durable athlete. That's helping the athletes sustain these increased workloads, and is absolutely having an impact on what we see or would call these more seamless transitions.
Hmm. I want to pick up on that idea a bit more about the integration of these teams, and maybe with the specific example of the Holmgrens who just went to Lidl Trek. Now, I know Lidl Trek has a development team on the men's side. I don't believe they have one on the women's side. However, I don't think the Holmgrens are going to be racing, say, Lotte Kopecky or Demi Vollering this year. I mean, I could be wrong, but is there a bit of Devo development going on within the women's structure there, you think?
Yeah, so this whole, like right now, all this stuff that we're talking about, sort of these evolutions of training and knowledge around training and recovery and all these things, it's moving so quickly. But for sure, everybody's trying to adapt and adjust to it and also experiment with it, and experiments can be positive and negative or successful or not so successful. But one of the things that's happening with these, more vertical integration inside the teams and this sort of like a rapid increase in integrated Devo teams, some teams, like you said, like Little Trek, they're not necessarily doing it with their women, but what they are doing is they're recruiting a large group of what you would call Devo women into their World Tour team right away. So like this year, I think Little Trek, they recruited juniors right into their women's World Tour team. So now that they've essentially integrated their development program inside their World Tour team, which is similar to what Ineos has done with men. So Ineos has this cluster or this group of the young development men just right in their World Tour team, which is not dissimilar to what we saw if you go back like 23 years ago or more now, and you look at Mape, which back in the day was this absolutely mega team. I think in their peak they had something like 55 riders inside their team. So this is what some teams are doing, like Little Trek in Ineos, is they're basically just moving their Devo group right into their World Tour team, as opposed to just having like a separate or a standalone U23 team. And I think we don't know yet which model is going to be more successful, sort of the dedicated U23 Devo team or the integrated Devo inside the World Tour team. We don't know what will be better, but I think the Holmgrens, going back to will Ava and Bella be racing against Kopecky and Vollering? Maybe, like, probably not every week, but I think we're going to see them lining up in a couple of races where they get a chance to sort of like smash tires with some of the best in the world.
But even some of the teams that have separate squads, like I'm thinking of Israel Premier Tech and their Israel Cycling Academy, movement is also fluid between those ones to a certain extent. Like we saw in the early days, Derek G racing up, and then I think even this year, Pierre-Andre Cote has gone up to the top squad.
Yeah, and this is why I think ultimately some of the regulations of the sport are going to kind of like pull sort of the structure of the teams in a certain direction. But for sure, this change in the rules that allows the allows the pro teams that have a Devo team to move their riders, so they can move their Devo riders up into a world tour project. They have this play up, play down, and they can do the inverse too. So they can take 32-year-old, like now 10-year career world tour rider and move them down into the development team and have them do like a 2.2 or 1.2 race with the developing riders. That is, if you kind of look at the academics of pathways and athlete development and all that mumbo jumbo, that is what you would call a step transitional pathway, right? Playing up and playing down and moving your athletes around so they get appropriate exposures to racing at a higher level, and they get mentorship from senior, more experienced athletes in really deliberate ways. And I think that it's a very, very well established, proven, awesome way to develop athletes. And the fact that it's now kind of written into the regulations, making it possible, and the teams are taking advantage of that possibility, is going to pull more and more teams to having the sort of the integrated but the standalone Devo team within their kind of like within their structure.
Now, we've been focusing on the superstars a little bit, and as you said before, these are, I'm not going to use your terms, I'll say outliers, but there are a lot of other riders in the mix. And now you've been thinking about the role of these riders. I believe the term you use is base rate athletes. Can you tell me more about what that means in terms of your thinking of their development?
Yeah, so that is you can take that concept and you could apply it essentially to any discipline. But if you think about it in the context of road cycling, where the most important thing in road cycling is developing a team-oriented approach to racing, right? So you need to race as a team, and you need to race really well as a team. So your superstars, like you have Pogačar or Evenepoel or whoever in your team, they're going to be able to win, X times more bike races if the team is super awesome. So you have to be thinking, when you're developing teams and you're developing team-based approaches to racing, the superstars are like they're amazing, but you can't have your primary focus on the superstars when you're trying to create an awesome team. Your primary focus needs to be on the team and what are the attributes and the characteristics and what makes up, my ideal team player, irrespective of the superstar. So the superstar has these attributes and characteristics too, and then some of these sort of physical capabilities or super special genetically given capabilities. They're there too, and they're going to lead them to these sort of amazing successes. But you have to be saying, like, what is this sort of archetype or base rider that I need to try to think about? This is the ideal profile of all athletes that come into my team. And you have to think about that. That is the more important thing to think about, because the super freaks, they're going to have all these characteristics too, and then they're going to have these special qualities. But if you don't have a strong team that's really like well defined within your performance group around what does the ideal athlete look like coming into my team, you're not going to ever have the ability to have this sort of high functioning team that can execute really well collectively in the bike races. And so that's kind of the base rate rider or the archetype rider. And what are those characteristics and attributes across all the dimensions of what makes up an amazing athlete and and a total person and all those things. And so that's the more important thing to kind of get right when you're thinking about teams, rather than focusing on these super special, really unique athletes.
Now, I think this term came out of a discussion that we had, or I became aware of this term when we were talking actually about Magdalene Valliers-Mill recent win at Trofeo Palma Femina. I guess a win isn't a team builder kind of event for a team builder kind of rider. Vallières-Mille, her role, usually with the team, is that of a domestique. However, she was given an opportunity to go for it in this one. And I believe, after speaking with her, that these opportunities will arise more and more. So I guess where I'm going with this is like there's a certain fluidity even amongst these archetypes of athletes that we see in the teams.
So what you're seeing too, like in pro cycling, and if you think about this sort of like archetype ideal sort of rider that you want to have in your team, is now in cycling teams, the teams that are doing that well, they're really good bike riders too, like, and like as we see now with Magdalene, who's she's now just out of U23. She's evolving physically and as a person, and she's developing her skills, and she can now win races. Right. So it took her I guess it took her 4 years, although, her development was definitely a little bit discombobulated by the pandemic a little bit. So what we're seeing with Magdalene now may have actually been possible a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. But for sure now we're seeing this idea, I think, of like a really good sort of like amazing team player who can win races in and on her own too, So now the team has like tons of options, like teams that are filled up with some real superstars and riders like Magdalene. They can play a much more versatile and dynamic game tactically, and they can have confidence that when they create scenarios or situations in the race where a rider like Magdalene is in a certain position, she can win from that position. And then you can kind of pull that back to a Canadian context. Like we need to do a really good job in Canadian cycling of like understanding this idea of like the archetype athlete and what they look like, so that we can develop more and more and more of those. If our focus and our emphasis is on being really good at identifying those kinds of riders, providing them opportunities and developing them, then that kind of links back to what we were discussing about this, this a little bit of this stagnation or decline that we have in Canadians in the top pro zones of the sport. If we're just trying to find, Michael Leonards or Remco Evenepoels or Egan Bernals or whatever, we're gonna miss a ton of opportunities to find, Magdalene Vallières-Mills and Hugo Hools and all these athletes that for us, they can do super amazing special things if we can support them to develop properly, and they can move into sustainable long-term careers, and they're going to be given opportunities in the races, and they're going to do special and amazing things. And I think our focus in Canada needs to be a lot more on understanding what that profile of athlete looks like, and developing more of them, and making sure that we're providing real, genuine, considerate opportunities for those athletes. Because if we're just focused on trying to see the super freaks, we're kind of playing a losing game.
What advice would you give to a strong junior rider who's not a superstar, but wants to stick with cycling and maybe has the potential to do so?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a really good question. And actually it's a really good question, because right now that's a question where the answer is the answer is getting, like, it's a challenge that's getting more and more difficult, right? Because I think the opportunities that we are creating in Canadian cycling for that athlete, like, we can do a better job in Canada as the sport builders and the coaches and the technical leaders and the programs and the whatever, to make sure that we are taking care of our most promising athletes, and that those opportunities for them exist. Because right now, what I see in Canadian cycling is we, like everybody does it, we kind of like jump on trends, or we copy ideas, and so right now there's this massive interest in junior, which is amazing. which is absolutely amazing, and it shouldn't go away. But at the same time, we're probably forgetting about that U23 development space and how critical and how important it is, and making sure that there's enough people working there and creating opportunities for our Magdalen Villiers Mills and our Hugo Hools to have the opportunities that Mags and Hugo had, and that they're going to be given those 4 years that are so critical to their development, so that they can actually move through that zone of U23 and progress up. So I think right now in Canadian cycling, we probably have a good emphasis on junior, but we're probably not looking enough across all the different phases and stages of developing amazing athletes. And we're probably a little bit under focused right now on ensuring that we have enough designed opportunity for U23s.
Well, Kevin, thank you very much for this discussion. As always, you've given me and listeners really great insights into the sport we love. And I think it really helps us understand what's going on. And yeah, I hope, we'll talk again soon, Kev.
Thanks, Matt. I really enjoy every time we get together and have a discussion, because yeah, for sure. Obviously, I think a lot about the sport, and I'm pretty passionate about seeing Canada be awesome in bike racing.
And that's the episode. It was written and edited by me, Matthew Pioro. I had help from Matt Hansen. Thank you, Matt.
As always, a pleasure.
Yeah. Are you going to remind me how you're the glue that keeps us together?
I am the glue here.
Matt Glue Hansen, thank you. Also, thank you to Terry McCall. This episode of the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast is produced by Adam Killick. He does something else.
He does the music.
He does the music. Thank you, Adam. Also, thanks to Ontario Creates for its support. So, not that we had much of a winter, but, winter is kind of not even trying anymore.
No, it's just given up.
It's totally given up. Maybe we should get out riding there, eh?
I'm ready when you are.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure about that, because usually you're emailing me, faxing me, carrier pigeoning me, your FTP. So are you okay?
Well, you tell me you'd like to know my updates. Whenever it goes up, you want to hear it.
No, I actually don't care, but I was just like, he seems to have stopped. Did his FTP go down?
Oh, heavens, no.
Oh, heavens, no, don't talk
you
like
wish.
that.
You wish, buddy.
I that would help. That would make me feel a bit better, actually.
Well, you've got that e-bike.
I don't.
Well, we can get another one. I'm sure we can get another. Reach out if anyone's listening.
I'm sure I'll have an e-bike soon enough. No, I do have a e-cargo bike, but that's not coming on our ride.
That might be awkward.
Yeah, that'd be heavy. No e-bikes yet, but there are some test bikes in the pipe. So yeah, I can't wait to get on those too. All right, well, we'll ride soon, bud. I hope the weather holds.
I hope you get an aero bike.
Why do you say that?
No, because you're gonna need it.
Oh, Jesus. Okay. Oh, I'm so scared.
Listeners, he isn't.
Listeners, though, however, I would like to remind everyone that we have a members area to our website. It's a very cool spot where you can chat with Matt or I. You can replicate this scintillating conversation that we're having here in our member site, and pick our brains on racing and gear as well. Also, it's a great place to find back issues of the magazine. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I want you to ride safe, and we'll talk to you later.